Welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into a document that's really been making waves, especially in international policy circles. It's a new, very detailed report presented not long ago in Berlin. And it makes some, pretty explosive claims about how education is managed within a major and, let's face it, often controversial international body.
That's right. And our job today is to really unpack the source material here. This is a report from the organization UN Watch, and it alleges that the Hamas movement has, for years, maintained operational control over UNRWA's education, specifically in Gaza. So we need to look at the evidence they're presenting, how they say this control worked, the potential systemic issues, and, of course, the calls for reform that have come out of it.
Okay, but before we jump into the claims themselves, maybe we should just quickly set the scene on UNRWA itself, the UN Relief and Works Agency, because it's quite unique in the UN system, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial point, yeah. A lot of people might just lump it in with general UN refugee work, but it's distinct. It's one of only two UN refugee bodies. You have the UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, which deals with, pretty much all other refugees globally. But UNRWA, its mandate is exclusively for Palestinian refugees in its specific areas of operation. That focus...
Exactly. And that unique structure, that focus, is what this report suggests might be a point of vulnerability. So let's talk about the source itself. The report comes from UN Watch. Its CEO is Hillel Neuer. Now, just for context for you listening, UN Watch is an NGO, a non-governmental organization, and it's generally known for, quite strong advocacy relating to Israel, and often takes a critical stance on the UN's actions, especially around human rights and neutrality.
Right, and having that context is important for how we evaluate the claim. So the main claim, which Neuer presented in Berlin, it's essentially that UNRWA didn't just have, say, financial or loose personal ties with Hamas. The allegation is much deeper, that UNRWA effectively allowed Hamas to dominate its entire education system in Gaza for decades. We're talking about sustained systemic control, according to...
And the implication isn't just about, mismanagement. It's about the result of that alleged failure. There's a quote from Neuer in the source material saying that years of poor supervision basically enabled Hamas to, and this is his phrase, radicalize a whole generation of young Palestinians. He claims UNRWA schools became hotbeds of hatred. I mean, that's a staggering claim about the long-term impact.
It really is. It goes right to the heart of the educational mandate, doesn't it? Which should be about promoting peace, neutrality, human rights. If the system itself from top to bottom is compromised, as the report suggests, then that core purpose is, lost.
Okay, so let's get into the how. If this control really existed for decades, as claimed, how would a political movement actually achieve that level of influence inside an international agency's schools? What were the mechanisms, the levers being pulled?
The report puts a heavy emphasis on personnel, on staffing. It explicitly claims that high-ranking Hamas officials were appointed to really key positions within the UNRWA education.
Key positions like what? Are we talking about teachers or higher up?
Much higher up, and strategically important roles. The report mentions things like school principals, heads of the professional unions, which is critical, and also educators involved in curriculum design. These roles give you control over hiring, day-to-day school operations, and crucially, supervising potentially thousands of teachers. If you control the managers, control the...
Right, that makes sense. Control the staff, control the content. And the report does list some pretty specific and, frankly, disturbing examples of what it claims was being taught or promoted.
Yeah, it does. The allegation is that from these positions, these officials shaped educational programs to serve a political agenda. The curriculum is accused of containing antisemitic material, yes, but also specifically glorifying suicide bombers, encouraging child soldier recruitment, and even explicit calls for the destruction of Israel. The report frames these not as subtle, but as clear, integrated parts.
Okay, so that's the classroom level. Let's zoom out a bit to the institution itself, because the report also talks about resistance to reform. This is where the alleged structural vulnerability really seems to come into play. It's one thing for bad actors to get in, maybe, but another for the system to resist fix.
Exactly. And the report gives concrete examples of these roadblocks, and they seem to center heavily around the power of the UNRWA work.
The unions, why are they so powerful here? I mean, local staff unions exist in many aid organizations, but they don't usually dictate educational policy over international management, do they?
That seems to be the crucial structural point highlight port. UNRWA relies massively on local staff, particularly in places like Gaza, and the union becomes this powerful administrative force. If a political group like Hamas allegedly dominates that union, they gain enormous overstaffing, yes, but also over policy. They can effectively resist directives from international management. Pushing back too hard could risk, say, a strike that shuts everything down.
And the prime example cited for this is the whole dispute over Holocaust education.
Yes, the report presents that as a really telling case study. It says back in 2011, UNRWA management tried to introduce Holocaust education, but the UNRWA union in Gaza, allegedly led at the time by Suhaila Hindi, who the report identifies as a Hamas political bureau member, flatly rejected it.
Okay, just to pause on that.
Yeah.
The Hamas Political Bureau.
Yes.
That's their top leadership body. If that claim is accurate, having a member leading the UNRWA union, that suggests a very significant level of penetration.
Precisely. And the story doesn't end there, according to the source. It notes that when al-Hindi retired in 2017, he was actually publicly praised specifically for blocking Holocaust education. So it wasn't just seen as internal resistance. The report frames it as a celebrated political victory for the union's stance against international management.
And the UN Watch report says this kind of union influence wasn't just limited to Gaza.
That's what they claim. They argue that this alleged Hamas control over UNRWA workers' unions also extended to Lebanon. And this control, they say, allowed the unions to actively block attempts to discipline teachers accused of inciting violence, to oppose removing anti-Semitic content from textbooks, and this is key to intimidate or push out international staff who tried to enforce neutrality or challenge the alleged Hamas agenda. It paints a picture of a system almost designed to resist external.
So, stepping back again, what are the broader implications here, according to the report? If this institutional capture is real, what does it mean for aid, for peace in the region?
Well, connecting the dots. The report argues UNRWA is fundamentally failing its mandate. Hillel Neuer's point is that instead of promoting stability and human rights, UNRWA, due to being structurally compromised, has effectively handed over the education of generations of children to extremists. That's the core accusation.
Which leads straight to the money, doesn't it? The donor country, billions in aid, they're being put on notice by this report.
Absolutely. The financial argument is central to their demand. The report directly calls out donor countries, Germany is mentioned, among others. It basically tells them, look, you need to realize your funding isn't just supporting a neutral humanitarian agency. It's allegedly propping up and legitimizing a system heavily controlled by extremist political actors.
So it shifts the debate from just, is the aid getting there, to what kind of system is this aid actually enabling? A critique of the whole organizational model.
Exactly. And the report goes further, making a really sharp critique of UNRWA's long-term role. It argues the agency inadvertently perpetuates what it calls the political appellate. The idea being that creating generations of dependence and resentment actually undermines self-governance and peace process, making it part of the problem, not the solution.
And because UN Watch is calling for such sweeping reforms, a full international investigation, they're also dismissing previous UN inquiries, right? Like the Colonna review.
Yes, they explicitly call previous reviews, like the one led by former French Minister Catherine Colonna. The reasoning seems to be that any internal or UN-led review is inherently flawed because, in their view, the system is incapable or unwilling to truly reform itself from within. They argue only strong external pressure and a completely different operational approach can dismantle this alleged control.
Okay, now we have to be balanced here. We're reporting on the claims of this specific report from UN Watch. There is, of course, a counter-narrative.
Absolutely essential include. The source material itself notes that UN officials have, in the past, rejected similar accusations against the UN, consistently defends its work, denies institutional links to extremist groups, and points to its own vetting procedures. They emphasize the vital humanitarian aid they provide, food, shelter, education, often under incredibly difficult and dangerous.
Right. So for you listening, trying to make sense of all this, what we have is this real tension. On one hand, the undeniable, immediate humanitarian need that UNRWA meets for millions of people, lives depend on. On the other hand, you have these very detailed, very serious claims from the UN Watch report about deep political infiltration, particularly in education, shaping minds over decades.
It really forces us to confront the risks inherent in running huge aid operations in these intensely political environments. The report highlights just how difficult it is to maintain strict neutrality when you rely heavily on local staff who might have complex humanitarian mission, yes, but also potentially to local political factors.
So the final thought we want to leave you with today is really a question, something to mull over. When billions in international aid flow into regions with powerful, entrenched political actors, how can the international community, the donors, the UN itself, realistically structure that aid and oversight? How do you ensure that essential functions like educating children remain truly neutral and aren't captured by local political agendas, potentially undermining the entire long-term goal of the aid? That fundamental dilemma between meeting urgent needs now and ensuring the integrity and long-term impact of the institutions providing that aid, that's certainly something worth thinking.